All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll give folks a few minutes to get logged in here, and then we'll kick off this week's edition. For those of you just joining, we're just letting everyone get online. So we'll kick off here in a couple minutes. All right, the number of attendees is slowed down, so I think we'll go ahead and get this kicked off. Welcome everyone to this month's edition of the Bending the Climate Curve lecture series. My name is Bethany Beers. I'm the sustainability practice leader here at Mazzetti, filling in for Christina, who usually MCs these events. This week's presentation features Cleveland Clinic, and we will be highlighting how Cleveland Clinic is measuring and managing its Scope 3 carbon footprint. Attendees will learn the fundamentals of carbon accounting, the categories of emissions in Scope 3, and how Cleveland Clinic is working to reduce emissions. Our presenter today is Jon Utech. He is the Senior Director of the Office for a Healthy Environment at Cleveland Clinic, where he develops sustainability strategies to impact environmental and community health. Jon sets Cleveland Clinic's environmental goals and develops strategies to achieve them. He also directs the organization's sustainability, or ESG, reporting using the UN Global Compact and GRI frameworks. Jon leads the organization's climate action, which includes policy engagement, decarbonization of scopes 1, 2, and 3, climate resilience, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. Jon serves as the chair of the Ohio Hospital Association Environmental Leadership, a member of the Healthcare Climate Council, sector leader for Healthcare Sector Steering Committee for the Better Climate Challenge, carbon consultant for the National Academy of Medicine, Climate Collaborative Working Group. Ooh, that one's a mouthful. He's the team lead for the Institute for the Healthcare Improvement Decarbonization Learning Community, and as a board member of the Evergreen Cooperative, an organization creating a network of worker-owned businesses. Jon works to engage Cleveland Clinic and the healthcare sector to support the mission of improving environmental health and human health. Jon earned an MBA and an MPOD from Case Western Reserve University and has a BA in history from Dartmouth College. Welcome, Jon. We are very excited to have you as our speaker today.
Thanks so much, Bethany. It's my pleasure to be here, and thanks to Mazzetti for hosting this wonderful lecture series. And I'm looking forward to teaching all of you a little bit about and talk about what Cleveland is doing with its carbon. So I'm going to share my screen here, get going. Okay. Couple more clicks and we'll be exactly where we need to be. Oops. As I click the right buttons, there we go. Okay. So again, my name is Jon Utech. I'm the Senior Director of Environmental Sustainability Strategy for Cleveland Clinic, a job that I've been in for about 10 years now. And I'm here to share a bit about our Scope 3 carbon journey, what we know, what we don't know, how we're measuring it, how we're managing it, etc. I will say to all of you that the focus and intensity on Scope 3, I'd say the pace has increased dramatically, 20-fold from where it was 3-4 years ago. What you all do impacts Scope 3 carbon footprint, so I'm sure you may already have discussions on some of your building projects. I want to link construction and show the broader picture as well. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Cleveland Clinic, We have a global network of hospitals. We have more than 70,000 caregivers. We're in the states of Nevada, Ohio, and Florida in the US. And we operate hospitals internationally in London and in Abu Dhabi. We drive a lot of research funding. We have more than 10 million patient visits a year. At the moment, 21 hospitals in our Cleveland Clinic network. From a square footage standpoint, it's approaching 35 million square feet in total. We've had a sustainability office since 2007. Christina, who sponsors this series, was actually the first lead of Cleveland Clinic sustainability. I took over for her in 2013. And over the 15-year period now, we've set a number of reasonably ambitious sustainability goals, including getting to zero waste with materials, achieving big gains in energy efficiency, green building, building our buildings better than code, reducing our carbon footprint of the organization. At the moment, we have a carbon neutral goal by 2027. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We have purchasing goals, we have engagement goals, and we do tree planting in the neighborhoods of our communities. And we also focus on uplifting education clinicians about sustainability and its relevance to their, what they do on a daily basis. I am fortunate. I have a small but dedicated and mighty team of folks, 6 people. I report within Cleveland Clinic up through Pat Rios, who leads a group called Buildings Plus Design. And that is within the group that, amongst other things, designs, engineers, and builds and operates our buildings. It includes EVS and some other functions like that. And Pat reports to our COO, reports to our CEO. If there's questions, I can answer how we kind of manage sustainability as a topic. My presentation, or I want to talk about that for a minute. So, sustainability in hospitals is done many different ways. Sometimes there's a small dedicated team of different sizes that take on issues. Sometimes it's more distributed. We actually have, if you look at the bottom right corner here, an environmental engineer. His name is Jeff Schultz. He handles from a construction standpoint, the green building certification, carbon footprinting, a whole bunch of green building related things. So we're managing our green building aspirations by having a set of design goals and design standards that get applied throughout the construction process. And Jeff works with the team to make sure that happens. So we're here to talk about carbon today, and scope 3 carbon. But before we go into scope 3, I just want to kind of showcase what Cleveland Clinic's carbon footprint is. This is, and I'm still using it just because it's, although we've quite climbed out of the pandemic. This is 2019 data. And I use it because I've done this talk for a little while, and COVID sort of distorted some purchase patterns, at least for a couple of years. I think we're returning to normal now. We did so last year. But this is Cleveland Clinic's carbon footprint. It gets divided into scopes. And scope 1 and 2 really relates primarily to the way that our buildings use energy. And again, this is not a scope 1 and 2 talk, but for Cleveland Clinic, where hospitals are in Florida and Ohio, where the electricity is reasonably, still has a fair bit coming from coal and natural gas. So our footprint is more than 400,000 tons. The vast, 2/3 of which are from our electricity. This light blue slice is natural gas. So you're more than 90% when you're looking at the moment anyways, electricity, natural gas. There are also pie slices here for steam. We have one hospital that runs on a district steam system down in Akron. This orange is anesthetic gases that I'll talk more about in a bit, but the anesthetic agents that we use to put patients under during surgeries are actually greenhouse gases. And then fuel is the final thing in scope 1 and 2. And by fuels, I mean diesel fuel to run our backup generators, and and fuel to run our and gasoline to run vehicles that we own. We have a fleet of about 300 vehicles. So that's scope 1 and 2. So, the way that we design buildings is imperative in terms of the usage of energy, and also, of course, how we run the buildings. And then at Cleveland Clinic, we have some operational policies that I haven't gotten into. Interested, I can answer questions that sort of drive down anesthetic agents and fuel and et cetera. But what I'm really here to talk to you about is scope 3. So scope 3 carbon footprint is carbon coming from everything else. So buildings that we own and operate, and those agents that you see on there drive our scope 1 and 2. Scope 3, it's the biggest thing in the dark blue is a carbon scope 3 category called purchased goods and services. So that's all the stuff a hospital uses. So I'm well involved in designing a variety of buildings, including healthcare buildings. The carbon associated with building buildings is in this orange slice called capital goods. And at least at Cleveland Clinic, capital goods are construction, things that are primarily things that are capitalized are construction, IT, and clinical equipment. What was really surprising to me when we did this was this light blue, which is investments. We have, and I'll take you through more detail on that. We have more than 70,000 employees. Their commuting is a substantial scope 3 item. In scope 3 are things from fuel and energy that weren't covered in scope 1, which is, the lossage, as an example. Electricity, when it's from where it's generated to getting to a building, you lose energy. So you're sort of accounting for that source usage. And then this is also transmission related. And then the other two that I'll talk about are waste generation and business travel. So, as I said, at the moment, there's tremendous interest in this. So anytime there's interest in something, it's really important to determine how you measure it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about scope 3 measurement on each of these topics. At the moment, when it comes to things we use in the hospital, the metric that we use is spend-based. So if companies were required and had to disclose the carbon for each product, we could ask them how much carbon is associated with each of the products they made, and we could add all those up and report that. But because that level of disclosure has not been required, it does not exist, really does not exist for healthcare purchased goods and services. In the construction part of this, because LEED has been, and other green building approaches are so mature and so well adopted, there's much better information on these items in buildings. However, on the most recent thing, which is embedded carbon, there's a fair bit of learning taking place there as well. But I say this to say that at the moment, we can measure our spend every year, which is that first thing, total product by category and supplier. And then we multiply that times carbon intensity factor, which EPA puts out. So if we spend X billion dollars on pharmaceuticals and multiply times the carbon emissions factor, these are actual items from our carbon footprint inventory. Basically, we're multiplying spend in categories. These are all drug categories times the industry emissions factor, and we're getting emissions. And you can see these two categories of products Pharmaceuticals are kind of at the top of the list for us in terms of the biggest opportunity areas. And next is supplies. So we've partnered with a group called the Institute for Healthcare Improvement that is helping us to look at different opportunities for reducing our Scope 3 carbon footprint. So what I have on here is I'm sort of highlighting the purchased goods and services piece, drugs, bandages, knee joints, anything we buy and use in a hospital, that's in Scope 3. Our paper, even office paper, office supplies, things like that, things are expensed. Those, at the moment, the big items focused on reduction in that there's like a number of sort of classes of case studies. Because we don't have product level data, there's a bunch of work taking place on purchased goods and services to try to pilot where the hotspots are, where the opportunities areas are. These 6 items on here are the big target areas right now. So the biggest one is waste reduction. So this is the fact that just in operating a hospital, we're balancing the operating room. We has a lot of disposable items that are used because of the way that medicine has developed in the last 40, 50 years. So it's a different topic, but one is just when a surgeon is there, there's typically like a physician preference card which says what items he wants out for the surgery, and getting those are right, because once the items are out, we can't reuse them. So, at Cleveland Clinic and other hospitals, there's a number of just waste reduction programs that try to reduce wasted supplies for the operating room. And there's big money there. Anesthetic gases, I have as another big dollar saving opportunity. There is 3 kinds of anesthetic gas, and one of them is called desflurane, and it is desflurane is far more carbon intense than the other anesthetic gases. I need clinicians to lead this, but we eliminated desflurane and took our anesthetic gas footprint down by about 65%. Another area of focus is on disposable versus reusable. This is a big item, and this is a design item when we're building healthcare facilities. So this is kind of something to keep an eye on, frankly, in that at the moment we build our facilities presuming a certain level of sterilization. And there's been sort of this tension between disposable versus reusable. Disposable is won the day in many areas. Because of Scope 3 carbon, because one way, as an example, one way you could reduce your Scope 3 carbon footprint is to purchase, I'll give an actual example from our hospital system, surgical basins, things they use to collect things during surgery, surgical basins. We have reusable ones. In fact, I found one that's dated 1989. So some of these last an awfully long time. We have sterilization equipment on our main campus that sterilizes that. If we got rid of a disposable basin, we'd reduce our Scope 3 footprint. But we're sort of underdoing life cycle environmental studies to ensure that we're not, in some fashion, by going to reusable, increasing carbon somehow. Lots of studies have been done. In general, it's always better to go, at least from a carbon perspective, reusable versus disposable. But there's many factors that go into using items in a hospital. Convenience, just preference. So these are all, disposable versus reusable is a category of discussion in our green supply chain committee. Another big driver, because transportation, is a big cost. And in general, hospitals have sort of waited convenience and scalability versus efficiency of shipping. So because supplies are expensive, we've gone to sort of more or less, not really just in time, but we're sort of storing less things on our hospital floor, having things shipped in batches from our supply chain partner to try to manage supply, which is good. We have to counterbalance with trying to ensure that when we're sending transportation, we're sort of loading trucks as efficiently as possible to reduce the carbon of transportation for moving things around. Very mature discussion on packaging with various alternatives. The same thing's true on the construction side. And then inhalers, which I just thought would be a fun little example for me to show. I'll show that in a minute on metered dose inhalers, which is a pharmaceutical where there's sort of been some published data and some, I'll share our example of that. On the generally speaking, on the capital goods side, we're looking to, on IT spending, get EPEAT certification. And then IT, the other one is just right-sizing the amount of equipment that you're using. Clinical equipment, same thing, over underutilization of imaging services. There's work, EPA is doing work to finally maybe get Energy Star rating for the clinical equipment. And on construction, for many years on green building, the conversation was all about the amount of building that the energy used, or the energy that the building used. Because there's an urgency to make progress within a decade, there's now a big focus on the embedded carbon of the construction process. Some early opportunity areas are concrete. There's different ways that concrete can be cured. And there are more things that can be added in that with a longer cure time, they emit less carbon. They typically take a little more curing time. So there's a bit of a push and balancing on that. And in one of our construction projects, we had a call recently with our construction partner. He's familiar with all the concrete areas, the concrete suppliers within region, and we don't have good data because they haven't been asked for it yet. So in the process of securing data, I'd love to kind of show you the math on this. We're in the process of doing this exercise for some big construction projects on our main campus. Steel, there's now tables that are out that like the VA, the government's pushing this really hard, and others. But they're putting together like the carbon footprint of different steel sources, and depending on the exact manufacturing method, some steel emits has more carbon embedded in it than others. Of course, then there's also just the design challenge on steel of, is there an alternative? And I've been looking recently at a bunch of timber buildings. There's a big hotel in Oslo, and I didn't get the picture in there, I apologize, but there's some really cool buildings being built out of timber, because timber is a renewable resource that doesn't have the same, there's some energy in cutting it and shaping it, but the carbon footprint's much lower, obviously, than steel. So I'm not going to talk about inhalers. So pharmaceuticals is the biggest supply challenge for carbon, because we spend a lot of money on pharmaceuticals. They're very energy intense in their manufacturing. And I'm showing this as an example of the kind of things that I hope in a couple of years we'll have 30 or 40 examples like this. But by inhalers, I mean metered dose inhalers that are used by patients that have asthma or other respiratory challenges. And our process for this is we looked at there's two propellants used in those inhalers that have greenhouse gases. So we added up all of the inhalers that we bought and did the math of, there's a ratio of the amount of kilograms of the product versus the amount of greenhouse gas. And we came up with 1,000 tons of carbon, or 900, almost 900 tons of carbon associated with this. And really driven by the fact that there's this one propellant. You can see that's has a global warming potential of almost 3,500. There's another one that's less, about half as little less than half as much. And then there are powdered inhalants that don't have any greenhouse gases at all. And so we did some, my first job was in management consulting, a company called Bain. They taught us the 80-20 rule. So I'm like, it's got to be a simpler version of this inhaler story. So we got the unit volume of all the inhalers that we buy. I'm not listing the exact ones, but this is our actual data on the unit volume. We then overlaid the grams of propellant of the different types of inhaler, and then also multiplied the carbon intensity. And that got us to the tons of inhaler per, or the tons of propellant for every inhaler. It turns out that 10 inhalers drive 90% of our footprint. So we have respiratory docs sort of taking on the use case of inhalers for different kinds of medical conditions. I've heard of a couple hospitals is looking to change their prescribing practices because we can really impact this inhaler footprint if we can get, less carbon intense inhalers in the hands of patients that where the other inhalers will meet their needs. Okay. Really interesting and big topic here is investments. So in terms of 80% of hospitals are in a not-for-profit structure. What that means is that we're able to take contributions, and certainly a number of the buildings that we build are partially invested by philanthropic donations. And we get other donations, some dedicated towards construction projects, some dedicated towards just general use or specific initiative. And over time, we, in the year 2019, which is when this footprint is done, we had $6.5 billion invested in the market. And we took an investment factor for the S&P 500 from 2017 and multiplied the 2017 version of the number times the intensity and got our investment footprint, which is a really big number. For pressure on the topic of carbon, there's probably no place where it's more intense than in finance right now. And there's been this massive upshift in interest in reporting and in net zero goals. So I share this with you because I'm sure you've been feeling it on your projects, but really since in the last 5 years, the discussion on carbon has changed. It's gone from scope 1 and 2 or carbon neutral to net zero. And you can see the demand for net zero pledges on the green line by countries. And this data is a little bit old, but at that point, I think 85% of countries had a net zero goal. At Cleveland Clinic, we operate in Abu Dhabi, which is the United Arab Emirates, and they're actually hosting the United Nations Communication on Progress this coming end of the year in December. I'll be going to do that with our Abu Dhabi hospital. Because the United Arab Emirates has a net zero goal. We have a hospital, as I said earlier, in London. And so, the UK has a net zero goal, as does the National Health Service. The yellow line is financial companies. You can see they sort of, in terms of a sector, are probably at the highest on net zero pledges. Orange is companies as a whole. And blue star is where I have healthcare pegged, mainly based on this roughly approximates the hospitals that have signed the Health and Human Services Pledge. So healthcare is lower, but there were 3 healthcare systems with carbon goals in 2017, and maybe, a dozen in 2019. And now it's it's 15% of the industry, maybe approaching 20 and rapidly changing. So we're in that part of the, in that part of the, you see what's happened with the countries and financials and companies is finally happening in healthcare. We're having this rapid upshift in adoption of carbon goals. And this is a, what's driving this is really society's preference, technology, options, and then obviously policy decisions, which is big for carbon specifically. And so they're trying to sort of influence decision makers on investments that will change the, the fundamentals and cash flows and lead to outcomes that transform those companies and portfolios. So by, communicating our carbon goals, ultimately what in the investing world we're trying to do and what we will need to do is sort of influence the types of assets and companies and how they're being run. In healthcare specifically, another big reason people are paying attention to this is that Moody's Investing Services and S&P's and Fitch's are all now using ESG ratings to rate bond performance. And a big focus on the E side is on carbon specifically and resilience in place of hurricane vulnerabilities. So it's another design topic. And increasingly we see events that aren't thought of happening, which is why from a design perspective, we need to sort of take the view of the next 50 years, not the last 50. Anyways, bond ratings, corporate bonds, they're all going through this screening process. And in that, just to get clear about it, this is these are the items that they're looking environmentally, socially, and from a governance standpoint. And really the first two are the biggest for all of you, which is physical climate risks and carbon transition. That, and really what they're trying to do is find out, are healthcare organizations measuring and managing carbon, and do they have a plan to account for it? And is it influencing and changing their, their investment decisions and their construction decisions and all that stuff? You can see the typical social issues. Healthcare has kind of outweighed impact in the social realm, obviously, with the healthcare services that we provide. And the ones you see here are ones that are common for non-healthcare company. How are you treating your people, and how you're accounting for their health and safety, wage levels, how are you dealing with responsible production in your supply chain on social issues, mainly things like slave labor and fair treatment of workers, all those kinds of things. And then on governance, how are you running and managing and keeping track of the risks and performance of your organization? Environmentally, physical climate risks, carbon transition. Carbon transition means the scope 1, 2, and 3 discussion that I'm having with you all now. So when Moody's did an assessment of Cleveland Clinic, I looked at the report at the time, and ultimately these ESG ratings can if they're out of whack, they're going to influence the credit rating of the organization, which is a big deal. Cost of capital is what the credit rating drives. And for Cleveland Clinic, we're managing our cost of debt against, our operating cash flow of our organization, ability to service that debt, and also the investment returns of our equity investments. So when it comes to sort of managing for change, there is, the reason I'm talking carbon accounting with you is the way carbon accounting works is activity factor times the greenhouse gas intensity. So really on any carbon issue, you can change the activity factor. So you could not, on a construction project, you can reduce the size of the parking lot, which reduces the carbon footprint of the building, or you can reassess and design and build a building with a smaller footprint, just done more efficiently. So that's obviously one big factor. Investments, factors like contributions and their performance, the investment. And then as investors, we have levers of industry mix. So, which industries are we investing in? Specific investment types. And then, we have a responsibility to engage investors that we invest in. So, as our investments move up and down, impact kind of varies. It's mainly a timing thing because at the moment, we're really using factors of the amount of carbon per dollar invested. So as investments go up, our footprint appears to increase and decrease. As we get better corporate carbon data systems, we'll be able to just use the actuals in a shared fashion. Obviously, here, if we get more contributions, our footprint goes up because we have more money that we're investing in tiny little ownership pieces of companies. But that can be mitigated by sort of managing the types of investments that we make when those contributions come in. And the main thing we can do is shifting to our investments to lower carbon intensity sectors, and examining specific investors. And do we want to invest in some healthcare systems have come out, we have not, but some have come out against investing in coal or certain kinds of high carbon energy systems. Investment shops will sometimes have investment themes. So making green building or clean energy an investment theme is another way to handle this. Our investment team is looking at putting an ESG policy in place to handle these and some other issues. Employee commuting. Obviously, where we build our buildings has a big impact on this in terms of the availability of transportation. So certainly in the green building world, there's a preference to have buildings close to public transportation so people can commute with public transportation as possible, or walking, or biking. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that issue here at Green Clinic, employee commuting, and some of the things that we've done. Employee commuting, two drivers of our commuting footprint. One is the miles commuted. How far are you going to work? And then what's your greenhouse gas for every trip that you take? So there are really four things that we can do to try to shift the footprint of commuting: work location, distance, commuting mode, and vehicle type. In terms of, we've done surveys trying to assess, what policies we can do to shift behavior. It's easier to get people to use public transportation in London than it is in Cleveland because of the density of the city, the available options and things like that. But we do surveys where we study peak commute times. This is at our main campus. You can see, not surprisingly, because of this, there's nurse shift changes, 7 and 3. Arrivals and departures, peak on the green arrival side and the blue departure side around those times. So we've talked to people about, how do you handle that bolus of people all coming at the same time? But, why did you get to work the way that you got to work? And what are the three things that most heavily impacted it? Which is often, obviously, the travel time, the work shift, and the availability of a vehicle. We have some policies in place. We're really trying to influence travel distance. We're trying to influence the availability of transit service. Trying to impact the travel experience as well. And we do have, a number of employees who commute by bike or other alternative modes, specifically for environmental reasons as well. So when it comes to, what are three factors that, would help you choose a different system? It's really reliability and availability of transit service against travel time. So Cleveland specifically, where I've done the most work on this candidly, we We have a regional transit authority that is really bus dependent. There's a couple train lines, but the main east-west train line is a mile's walk from our campus. So we've tried things where we try to ferry people from the train stop to the campus with, middling success, to be fair. But we're in a group that talks transportation and commuting issues with what's called University Circle, which is around our campus, and we're trying to collectively handle transportation issues really as a system and not just as individual employers. So these are all different ways of getting to work that aren't driving alone by a car, which is on there. So availability of public transportation is a big deal. Carpooling is a big deal, and telework has had a huge impact. We'll talk a little bit about those. COVID was a game changer in so many ways, as we all know. One of them was in commuting. So this is data from the National COVID Commuting, the National Commuting Survey in 2019 and 2021. And you can see that COVID more than tripled the work at home national commuting response. So you generally would think that would be good, but we're actually losing both drive alone nationally and public transportation people. And the decrease in public transportation because of COVID was more than 50%. So win on the one hand, loss on the other. We've been doing transportation surveys, since 2017, and we happened to do one during the COVID year. But during as the way that we did this footprint is we for Florida, where we didn't have good data, we got the proportion of people that commute different ways based on this transportation Bureau of Transportation survey. This is the percentage of people that use different commute modes. For Alabama, it's just listed alphabetically. In Alabama, it's 85% drive alone. Interestingly, in Alaska, it's only 70%. So a lot more walking, working at home, other things. Interesting stuff in the survey. Anyways, this is the data for Ohio. We have about more than 50,000 of our 70,000 people work in Ohio. So certainly the big driver of commuting footprint at the moment is in Ohio. In Ohio, again, more than tripled, almost quadrupled in terms of the work at home rate. It went up 10 points from 3 to 13. The big loser was driving from home, but also public transportation and carpooling at the state level. You can see public transportation in Ohio, much less used than nationally, just because of the nature of cities and infrastructure in Ohio. But this was fascinating because we did our employee commuting survey during COVID. We did it in 2020, right? So you can see pretty directly here, and at the we have the biggest thing being driving alone, but it went from 85% down to 70%, and working from home went from basically zero. I think maybe we had 50 people at Cleveland Clinic that work from home, maybe 75. We now have 3,500, so it's changed pretty dramatically. You can see the increase in working from home and then kind of leveling off. One fascinating thing we also did was look at, we have a number of frontline workers at Cleveland Clinic, our EVS staff, food service, our valets, some frontline workers. This time around, we actually we handed a paper survey out. And from that, look at this. It's just fascinating to see that our frontline workers, these paper responses, there was no change in commuting behavior, right? People that were driving drove, the people that were busing bussed, and really all the carpooling and all the stuff at the bottom here, you can see carpooling. That red line is bigger. It's about 5%, 4%. The Cleveland Clinic as a whole, it's 8% in this group, carpooling. In general, people, some of them just don't have access to a car. So these are some of our big bus users. But this just shows that, people in those entry pay brackets just have less options and flexibility. They weren't able to change the way that they got to live. And so they were taking the bus, they had to keep taking the bus, and that's what the data shows. So we've done a couple things that try to influence transportation and commuting behavior, because if you look from a pollution standpoint, emissions from auto, and this isn't carbon, this is particulate matter from cars, is a huge environmental health issue in cities. And there's data that actually shows that proximity to busy roads increases incidence of cardiac and pulmonary issues. So getting people to drive lower emission vehicles is a health strategy. And these are the ways that we try to support that health strategy. Carpooling. If two people carpool with a space, it's a 50% discount for two, and it's free if 4 people carpool. We give people a lower parking rate at our main campus where we charge for parking. We're about 25,000 people working. If they drive a fuel efficient vehicle, so they get a lower parking rate. We have an incentive in for purchasing an electric vehicle, $1,000 for a new one, $500 for used. We promote public transportation, the RTA Commuter Advantage program. For biking, we have a map for bikes and showers to try to get those people, especially people new to the organization, understand where they can park and manage their bike commuting at our organization. Another transportation thing we've done recently, and we've done this recently on some construction projects too, is we're incorporating electric vehicle charging stations. Ohio's, there's this push-pull of total EVs in the state and total EV charging stations. A lot of the leaders where there's many more charging stations, like the 35,000, 34,000 plus in California, has been driven by state policy. But as EVs we're sort of past the tipping point, this is increasingly an issue out of the construction item. Ohio's kind of in the middle of the pack a little bit, the number of EVs per charging port. But in total, 1,800 EV charging stations in 2020, it's increased. But we recently announced, this will be in addition to these, we're adding 126 level 2 ports, which is about 8% of the total in the state. And we used a state grant from Ohio EPA to do that. And we partner with a company that's installing these at no capital cost to Cleveland Clinic. And so this was just, I think, the first place. This is out in Avon Lake where we put one of these charging stations. So that's something to look at and try to support on construction projects, certainly. But in summary, our policies and frankly, the big shift in work from home basically had the impact of shifting more than 7,000 commuting FTE equivalents out of our commuting, which is 50 million miles a year, and a reduction in our work from home footprint by 10%. Fuel. So these are emissions that aren't related directly to like the electricity using in the hospital. It's accounted for transmission losses and losses in the shipment of methane, which our hospitals use both of those fuel sources. And we get this data we have an automatic bill pay system that automatically scans and reads the bills in. And then for our fuel, we get it from a couple different fleet reports and enter that in manually. And it turns out that there are upstream energy, which means energy kind of from losses. There's on fuels, the big one is natural gas, just because the volume of natural gas, these are basically losses of natural gas in the transmission to get into Cleveland Clinic. And then on electricity, these are the emissions lost in getting energy from power plant to Cleveland Clinic, 34,000, 14,000 tons. And then there's also just upstream transmission distribution losses, which are typically 4% of your emissions. So on these, the primary way to deal with emissions from electricity and natural gas is to use energy efficiency and renewables. So electricity, reduce as much electricity as you can, and then renewables to cover what you can't ultimately take down. On natural gas, it's reducing load if you can first, and then electrifying or using heat pumps, and then finally offset for what you can't get rid of. On diesel and gasoline, it's electric vehicles is the solution. On fuel oil, ultimately electrifying and putting microgrids in instead of having diesel oil as a backup generating solution for hospitals. And our really the heart of the energy reduction strategy is these three things. This was a carbon footprint on scope 1 and 2 that we had put together. Green is energy efficiency, pink is electrification, and orange is renewables, just to give you a sense of the relative magnitude of these within the Cleveland Clinic's footprint. Our biggest success to date has been energy efficiency. 7 strategies has taken us down more than 20% and saved cumulatively $100 million. It's also driven our carbon footprint down. As well, we competed in something called the Better Buildings Challenge, a Department of Energy energy efficiency challenge to take usage down 20%. And we did the biggest reduction of anyone in healthcare. And ultimately this, along with fleet efficiency, anesthetic gases, and renewables, has driven our total carbon footprint on scope 1 and 2 down by 25% and carried the other energy emissions along with it. Finally, I'm going to talk about quickly is waste generation. In a hospital, people have ideas on how to do things better. We had for years, it's been supplanted, but a program called My 2 Cents, where people brought in their cost-saving ideas. I ran this program for about a year when I started. About 80% of the ideas were related to waste reduction. And so in a hospital, just about everybody every day uses materials to do their job. And you can see the categories of things that we track here. I'm certainly not going to read through them, but we take these categories that we track, EPA waste material categories, because they've calculated the carbon intensity of different ways of processing waste streams. And then we look things up in this lovely table. And this is our actual data. And like the first line is municipal solid waste. There's an emissions factor for municipal solid waste based on our weight, which is gets us to the tons that you see there. And treated RMW is next, and then paper and biohazardous waste. We publish all these in our report, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about it. This is in terms of weight, though, municipal solid waste is the biggest driver. We've got 2 very successful programs for getting people out of that, which is our paper program, and a program which recycles all paper and commingled. This is our current footprint at 14,000 tons. And without the paper recycling, we'd be at, if I put those in at the waste, at the landfill rate, it's 18,000 tons. So our recycling actually saves us 4,000 tons of greenhouse gases a year, which is notable. And we have, thousands of paper containers. We've got a deal in place where we make paper recycling affordable. There still are some hospitals where recycling paper is super expensive. Paper is valuable. Use recycling to drive costs down and get all paper in these types of containers. Same thing for commingled. We want to keep recyclable items out of our waste stream. In 15 years, our commingled program has offset more than 15,000 tons of carbon, which is the same as more than 3,000 cars driving for a year, or more than 3,000 homes electricity usage for 1 year, or 1.9 billion smartphone charges. But everybody cares about this stuff. It does have an environmental impact and a carbon footprint reduction impact. Business travel is really small. We had a dip in business travel. I was able to get this data from we have everybody purchase tickets from the same travel agency, so I just got the data from them. Yeah, that's what I want to share about our carbon journey. What if there's any questions?
There is a couple here. One is actually just a comment from Joseph Sprague, who says, you should participate in the ASHI Energy to Care program. Very impressive. Next question.
I didn't mention, but I think we certainly have in the past. I think we do now, but that's a great program. I agree 100%. And something that on the scope 1 and 2 and on these other things, it's a great resource. Yes.
Excellent. Excellent. Next question. Could you please share any policies you have in place for sustainable purchasing?
Yeah, what we have on the construction side is, well, any contract we have has a data clause that requires that they give us data, because the starting point for any time you're trying to start something is just having a wedge to get the data, which some companies certainly will do voluntarily. But really the starting point for any of this is to get into your just base contract. You got to give us the data. And then what we've done is for individual contracts, we've put it in our employee code of conduct. We've put our goals in. We make this a part of kind of the regular series of presentations to vendors who meet with us and talk with us. And then we have we sort of built our own internal Cleveland Clinic sustainability standard. That's kind of our internal guide stick on energy efficiency or materials or indoor environmental quality, which is a lot based on LEED, but drawn on other green building tools like, Fitwell and the well building standard and living building challenge, so we actually use a diverse set of things. And what we're in the midst of doing specifically for, we have a big project called the Innovation District, and we're trying to sort of create our embedded carbon purchasing standards. I do not have those in hand, but we're getting in hand kind of the degrees of freedom on the two biggest ones, which are on the metal and the cement and a few others. So we're going to sort of, the next generation of our green building standards can actually build standards around embedded carbon. And we've done a few of these studies. We're now setting goals and trying to achieve those on building projects.
Excellent. Excellent. Next question. What is the software platform or tool used to track and calculate your scope 3 carbon emissions?
We use a tool from an organization called Healthcare Without Harm Practice Green Health. They have full disclosure. I helped to design the tool because I'm a carbon accountant myself and did this for other companies before I took on this job. So I actually helped them create both a scope 1 and 2 calculator and a scope 3. So that's the one that we use, just because I've been involved in building the engine, if you will. So I know it works well. But there's other tools out there. If you want to learn more about carbon accounting and scope 3, the National Academy of Medicine has some other lecture series that's really good. Mazzetti has published, some of the best work I've seen in other places on other elements of both energy efficiency, renewables, electrification, carbon. That's a great resource. And the DOE has some great resources. We're part of a challenge called now the Better Climate Challenge, which is tackling not only initial scope 1 and 2 emissions, but sort of taking the whole, you commit to getting to 50% down, including renewable energy and things like that.
Excellent. Just a couple questions left here. I know we're almost at time, but do you see a difference in carbon emissions, maybe on a square foot basis or any other metric between the US operations and your international operations?
Well, we have 2 big international locations. For a variety of reasons, yes. And in London, where we built a hospital, it's our lowest hospital in the system for a number of reasons. One is that, we set some aggressive green building goals. The City of London actually prescribes pretty aggressive goals. So at the moment, that's led to our best outcome and best integration. We have a cogen plant, renewables, a pretty robust energy efficiency strategy. But a lot of, at the moment on scope 1 and 2, a lot of it is the electricity. Where are you getting your electricity from? If it's more carbon, your footprint's higher. If it's less carbon, it's lower in total. But that gives you more opportunity to reduce.
Great, thank you. All right, last question. Are you finding that GPOs like Premier, Vizient, et cetera, are putting pressure on suppliers to make product level emissions info available?
Great question. I'm flying out to Las Vegas in September to go to a Vizient supplier conference to be talking to suppliers about this issue. We're members of Vizient. I can't really speak for the others, but they are now in the process of asking questions about carbon, asking for disclosure. Vizient, of course, historically has been more robust on clinical products, what they're putting into building products. Most importantly, asking those questions. And I'm trying to guide this to where we sort of get all the data in like 1 or 2 places and not have every customer healthcare system ask for the data, at least at the corporate level. It really should go in a couple places and then we can all just access it. I think the GPOs can play a really important role there. And just demand to get better data in a database. I know there's work going on, a project called SHAPE, to try to become a carbon footprint product carbon repository, which also would be incredibly helpful. But in healthcare specifically, we have the National Academy of Medicine doing this work. The Joint Commission has been talking about regulating or requiring carbon disclosure. That's gone where it's voluntary at the moment, but may become mandatory in the future. All of these, the investors are looking for this. And, I think increasingly we're finding ways to record and deliver this stuff. So as always, it's a fun and exciting time to be in the business of building amazing buildings. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, John. This was a really great presentation and great overview of Scope 3 and really how your organization is approaching it. I think there's a lot of takeaways for everyone here today. So thanks to everyone who was able to join us this month. We're really excited to continue this series. We've got all the way through the end of the year scheduled and are looking at the first quarter of next year. Please join us next month when we will be featuring the Valley Children's Hospital story. Rethan Milivoy will be joining us to talk about their microgrid project and really how that has been a pivotal shift in their environment, their environmental viewpoint as a hospital, and all the different ways that it is influencing how they recruit, how they talk to their clinicians, and what an impact that project is going to have on their organization. So with that, thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate you sticking with us a couple extra minutes past the hour. Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Bethany, have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.